Hey everyone, it's Erica Holland, certified ballroom dance instructor and personal trainer. I'm here giving my thoughts on Dancing with the Stars, season 34, week 2. The theme was One Hit Wonders Night, which I personally enjoyed. I loved listening to all the old classic songs, and I feel like this is one of the best theme nights that they've had in a while. Once again, I'm looking at my notes, so if I'm looking down a lot, that's why. To start things off with, I want to talk about the two couples that got eliminated, Corey and Jenna, as well as Baron and Britt. Sometimes a double elimination on week 2 can feel a little harsh, but I do understand that they're trying to wrap up the season before Thanksgiving. I am not really surprised by this elimination. I feel like all of week 2 is about, did the celebrities listen? Even if it was just one little thing to show improvement, I am looking to see if they took any advice from the judges or their pro partners. And for me, I felt like Corey and Jenna, and as well as Baron and Britt, were the only two couples that kind of regressed versus improved. All right, so to kick off the night, we had Alex and Val with a jive. I thought that she had improved. The jive is all about having endurance and really showing your athleticism. So I really felt like she did a good job with that. She's still over rotating a lot, and she is over, I will say, flexing her knees. With your knees, you want a little bit of a compression to them. I feel like she does a really deep plie and then she springs right back up. Okay, you can't have that because that's also how you get injured. So I really want her to flex her knees, have those soft knees. If you're a dancer, I'm sure you've heard that expression 1,000 times. And that will also help her make her movements more of a phrase because it's like she hits a pose, drops all her energy, hits another pose when really things should flow together a lot more better. Next, we had Danielle and Pasha with a cha cha. I've really been enjoying Danielle so far. I feel like she understands her role as a follower, which is to take cues from the leader, but also she knows when to initiate certain movements and takes responsibility for her actions as a follower. So I've been really enjoying her so far. I will say she's been taking a little too big of a step for Latin dancing. With Latin dancing, we want to keep our feet underneath our hips. So make sure you're not taking too wide of a steps. That would be my advice for her moving forward with the Latin dancing. Next, we had Andy and Emma. Surprisingly, Andy showed improvement, a little bit of improvement, but it was still improvement. Something that I would tell him is in the ballroom dances, you want to take bigger steps, especially in tango. You really want to glide across the floor. And also, I would tell Andy, it goes back to what I said last week with him, is don't make yourself small. If your feet are not good, what I would tell my male leads is like, if you do one thing, embellish the upper body. So bigger arms, bigger frame. Whenever you go out of frame, make sure your arms are really circling. Make sure your arms are as wide and big as possible. So don't shrink himself. He needs to take up the space and be a little bit bigger. That would be my advice to Andy. Next up, we also have Lauren and Brandon with their Foxtrot. This is one of my favorite one hit wonder songs, so I love this song choice. And similar to Danielle, I feel like Lauren really understands how to dance in a partnership. I feel like the other couples haven't grasped how to work with their partners yet, but Danielle and Pasha and Lauren and Brandon, I feel like they understand what it means to work in a partnership, and I can see it in their dancing. She had a really good frame. I would tell her to watch her turn. She was a little off center in some of those pivots, but overall, she did a really great job. Next up, we have Jordan and Ezra with a jive. For me, Jordan was the most improved. I felt like she really took all the notes from the judges of last week and put it into this jive, and I can see her potential really starting to form. Something you want to be careful about in the jive. I knew she would do amazing at this because she is an Olympic athlete and she really showed her athleticism in this dance. But one thing I would caution her is make sure that she doesn't go too fast because sometimes she got a little bit ahead of the music, a little bit ahead of Ezra. So just make sure that you don't go too fast. Next, there was Corey and Jenna with a cha cha. Once again, as we know, Corey did get eliminated. I will say the one thing I enjoyed with Corey is anytime he was doing solo work, I felt like he was super committed and he did a really great job. But unfortunately, ballroom dance is about how you interact with your partner. So whenever he connected with Jenna, that's when the moves started to flop. One important note about the cha cha in Latin dancing is you cannot pick up your feet. You cannot march the steps. And he was doing a lot of marching. He needs to strike the floor. So he needs to pretend, like I said last week, like there's honey or gum on the bottom of your shoe and make sure that your toes always have a connection with the ground. Up, we have Jen and Jan with a quick step. I thought that she improved a lot. I think she might do better with the ballroom dances versus more of the Latin dancing. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and that's something that in week 2 you start to see. Also, I felt like her arms were a little bit more stronger. She was more engaged. I would just warn her to make sure that she's keeping up with Jan. In ballroom dancing, when you have a strict frame, the follower is a little bit offset from your leader. However, sometimes it felt like Jan was going full speed and she was trying to catch up with her feet to him. So just make sure that you're staying in position and frame with your partner. Next, we have Robert and Whitney with a tango. If I'm being honest, I have danced to this song several times and I've always done a cha cha to this song. I really didn't feel like this song was a tango song. I think that's why Bruno gave that comment because I feel like they were trying to help bring more fun out of this song and do something different because this really isn't a tango song. Robert has great action when he glides across the floor. Like he just moves. He has such great energy. I would tell him to watch his alignment because sometimes his chest kind of sticks out. It happens a lot of times with guys. We tell them, oh, watch your alignment, watch your frame, and they overcorrect and they end up sticking their chest out. And that also throws off the alignment. But overall, I actually enjoyed Whitney's choreography. But once again, this is more of a cha cha song, not really a tango. With the jive. Once again, Elaine is just so classy and elegant, and she makes things look easy. I loved Alan's choreography. I thought he had a good blend of like the cheer moves, but also the jive. And she had really good endurance. She's still struggling with those turns. So when you turn, you have to spot your turns and you have to watch your head. So your head is the last thing that moves when you turn, and she moves her head a lot and bobbles her head a lot in the turns. So I just tell her to control her head and spot those turns. Afterwards, we had Baron and Britt with their samba. As stated earlier, Baron did get eliminated. Once again, I don't think the song matched well with the dance. The samba, you need a lot more bounce action, and he also needs to be aware of his directions. So in ballroom dance, we have something called alignments. That's the direction you travel in. Samba is one of the few Latin dances that has explicit direction. So if you look at our manual, it literally says go diagonal wall, go diagonal center, go on the line of dance. And I'll probably make a video explaining what alignments are later on. But I feel like with Baron, he didn't know where his moves were going. If Baron were to continue, I would really have loved to see him tap into his athleticism. That's something that Jordan, I compliment her on. You can see that she is an athlete and she brings that mentality to the stage. And I would have liked to see that with Baron and Britt. Hey everyone, so this is not an ad. I forgot to comment on the cha cha that Mark and Whitney did in week 2, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. I really enjoyed their dancing. She has such stage presence, strength, and power. The one thing I would tell Whitney about is to make sure she turns her feet and her knees out, not inwards. There are a lot of times in the dance where her knees would turn inwards and her toes would turn inwards, and it affects the integrity of the dance as well. It throws you off balance for her turns. So I would just tell her to keep in mind for Latin dancing, make sure your foot has a slight turnout. Right, next up we have Hilaria and Gleb with their Tango. I really enjoyed this song. I thought that the dance moves fit perfectly. Gleb's choreography is good. I feel like Hilaria is such a breath of fresh air for Gleb. Like she's athletic, she has rhythm. It was very strong and sleek. I would say watch where you place your foot. Sometimes her foot placements got a little messed up. I saw her on the ball of her foot sometimes when she shouldn't have been, but overall, they did a great job. The last two dances were Dylan and Daniela with a samba. I did see some slight improvement. He seems like he knows where to put his feet now. Last week in his cha cha, he was kind of messing up with the feet. I credit that to nerves because it was the first show, but it seems like he's gotten a better job at his foot placements. I 1000% agree with Derek. He needs more power in his dancing. In my experience teaching guys, I'm always telling them to loosen up, don't be so stiff. But in his case, I really want him to bulk up and power up. From a personal trainer perspective, I think he needs to do more arm and back exercises. He really needs to engage those back muscles because, once again, his shoulders were a little bit too rounded forward and a little bit too slouchy. I would like to see how he does with a more standard ballroom dance. Maybe he needs more rules and restrictions, and that's where the power will come from. But overall, I really hope that Dylan next week brings something out because it's starting to look like he's lacking confidence. And Dylan could easily win this competition. He has the look, the charm, the charisma, the TikTok followers. He could potentially win this, but I need to see more confidence and more power in his performance. Next up, we have Scott and Riley. I would say the same thing to Scott. Like I would say to Dylan, it seems like with Dylan and Scott, there's something holding them back. Like, I know he can be better than this. So he really needs to dig deep this week and find something to resonate with and really bring out that power. I love Scott's facial expressions. He always finds that beat and looks straight to the camera. And I love that because he really engages with the audience in a way that I don't think some of the other couples have. In the cha cha, he needs to watch his wrist. Sometimes he was flicking his wrist and the fingers were facing inward. You want the fingers to be to the audience. So he needs to watch his wrist movements in the Latin dancing. And similar to Danielle, he needs to take a little bit more tinier steps. Overall, it was a great night of dancing, and I relatively agreed with the judges' scores. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you like, comment, and share. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along for more updates. See you next week for week 3 for TikTok night. Thank you.